Hello, everyone. May I have your attention by compassion for those who are listening to this English and Spanish translations. If you could kindly put your phones on flight mode because it creates less interference and takes 30 seconds and enables everybody to follow the teachings better. Thank you. Enjoy the teaching.
Dagi jinsu jibe sunam chi zhu lai penche sanje zhu par shu sanje chu dan cu ji chu nam la chang ju par do dane jam su chi dagi jinsu jibe sunam chi zhu lai penche sanje zhu par shu Sanje chu dan su ji chu nam la chang chu par do dane cham su chi yin be su nam chi pen chira sanje ru par shu sem chi tam chi dewa dan devi chung chi dan dung re chi ju dan zhao chur chi dung re me be ba dan men zhao chur chi nye ren cha dan dan zhe ve dan nyom chen bo la ne ba chur chi sem chi tam chi dewa dan devi ju dan den ba chur chi dung re chi ju dan zhao chur chi dung re me be dewa dan ba dan men zhao chur chi nye ren cha dan dan zhe ve dan nyom chen bo la ne ba chur chi sem chi tam chi dewa dan devi ju dan den ba chur chi dung re dan dung re chi ju dan zhao chur chi dung re me be dewa dan ba dan men zhao chur nye ren cha dan dan zhe ve dan nyom chen bo la ne ba chur chi Chom den de jambe yang la chang cai no kang ge lo zhe dim nye zhen zhe nye tar nam da rab sar ve chi nye tun gu chi xin si ji ni ji do kar le bam kang da si be zhen ra ma ri mun tu ma dung ra chi sir ve ro so gun la bu ji tar se yin la zhu ju yang den song Rudra Chadro Nyumo Nyelon Leche Chadro Drze Chen Mari Munsir Dungra Nyuko Chinye Chunze Rajan Yune Tachen Sachu Tarsun Yunten Luzo Gyarse Tuyu Ko Chura Chudan Chunye Jent Nalu Munsirin Jambe Yang La Du Zedin Chuji Chenra Vusire Chi Dalu Temo Mumba Rabsarane Gada Tenju Shunlu Toba Yi Lo Dru Bobe Nawa Tsar Do Sor
So now we're getting to the three last parts of the seven branch prayer, the prayer in seven parts. So we are, I think, on verse number 10. So here it is the request we make to the Buddhas to turn the wheel of the Dharma. O lanterns who illumine worlds in all 10 directions, by way of the progressive stages of awakening, you have become Buddhas, free from attachment. Protectors, I entreat you all, turn the supreme wheel. So Rinpoche will now read another translation by Patrick Carré. So, as before, we imagine either simply by aspiration, we go towards the innumerable number of Buddhas, or by imagination, or truly, if we can. But at least in a first stage, we aspire to be in front of the Buddhas, to stand in front of the Buddhas, and ask them to teach the Dharma. So going to the commentary, the text, the prose text. Let's listen to the Samantabhadра's words. And noble sons, then there is, invite the Buddhas to turn the wheel of the teachings. And each atom of the universes of all spaces of all times until the confines of space and absolute dimension, there are as many fields of Buddhas and atoms in an unspeakable number of universes, and in each one of these fields, all the Buddhas that are as numerous as the atoms of an unspeakable, unfathomable number of universes are attaining perfect enlightenment in each instant, while the oceans of bodhisattvas surround them. Then we turn to the most the diversity of expedients as we aspire to the Buddhas through their body, speech, and mind to turn the wheel of the teachings, and then the spheres of the universe. Then the universes of negative karma will have an end. Instant to instant, you will overcome them without ever your body, speech, and mind tiring of it. So here, in a way, we're like the spokesperson of all beings in the 10 directions, who are obscured by confusion and who are wandering in the samsara. And the Buddhas are here designated by the term of light, of lantern, of torch. Different translations are proposed that can dissipate this darkness, this obscuration that is the confusion of beings. And it is in this with this that we turn to them as torches, as lanterns, as lights in the 10 directions. So these Buddhas have progressively become Buddhas. That is, they have traversed the 5 paths, the 10 lands, the 10 stages of progression on the path. Having crossed them all, they have reached the unsurpassable state of enlightenment. And to those who have at the very instant attained enlightenment, but haven't yet started to teach, we turn to them in particular. These Buddhas have no attachment. They are free from any project tied to ego or desire, etc. So in a way, we become the spokesperson, and we request them to shed their light on beings who are obscured, in obscuration. So here we ask them to turn the wheel of the Dharma, of the teachings. It is, we saw different ways of understanding what the wheel is. Here, Taranatha in his commentary explains that the wheel is the same as we would see on like a chariot, and it has the following characteristics. It has the characteristic of stability. It has the capacity to move, to take us somewhere. And in this sense, the wheel is not affected by afflictions and is able to help us along the path towards enlightenment. And in this way, the idea is that listening to the teachings leads the audience to move ahead, to move towards enlightenment. And in this way, the teaching is like a wheel that leads somewhere, that takes us. That's the definition that's given here. So we make the request, we ask them to teach the Dharma, that is the insurpassable Dharma, the teaching that unveils the reality of our mind, and that is a particular teaching, uncomparable to other views, to other types of teachings. So then we address ourselves first to the Buddhas who have not yet started to teach, to entreat them to teach. But it's not limited to those Buddhas. It also we also address this to the Buddhas who are already teaching and asking them to continue to teach again, and in an appropriate manner in each instant. So the Buddhas have great affection for all sentient beings and are free from all attachment, and they are omniscient, and in this way they don't really need us to invite them to teach. We do it, or at least they ask us to do it this way, in order that we cultivate towards the Dharma a real respect, a real deference, and a real opening, a real openness, so that we ourselves can be the recipients of this teaching. And because in reality, it is not envisageable that a Buddha not teach. So this request is made in the name of sentient beings, driven by compassion for all sentient beings, and it's a method to refine our own attitude. Then the next stanza, the next verse. Palms joined, I beseech those among you who mean to manifest the state beyond suffering. For as many eons as there are atoms in the universe, remain for the welfare and happiness of all beings. Rinpoche is now reading another translation that exists only in French. So, Samantabadhra, in the noble sense, explains, noble sons, there is what we call implore the Buddhas to stay in the world. Tell yourself this. When, however numerous are the atoms of all the universes of all times into the confines of space in the absolute dimension, the Buddhas that came will manifest their parinirvana, as well as the bodhisattvas, the auditors, and the Pratyeka Buddhas on the paths with and without training. And as it goes to the friends of virtue, I implore them all, as many as there are, not to go into parinirvana, but to stay in this world for as many cosmic eras as there are as atoms, for the good, for the welfare and joy of all beings. And that thus the sphere of space and those of beings with their karma and their negative emotions will have an end. Until they have an end, my prayer will not end. And so instant after instant, I will dedicate myself to this without my body, speech, and mind tiring. So ultimately, in the ultimate reality, there is no parinirvana. The Buddhas do not go into parinirvana. However, if we look at beings, for beings who are in confusion, they manifest as going into parinirvana. This is not without reason. Because by going into parinirvana, in manifesting their entry into parinirvana, this enables something very beneficial to manifest in the world. It is for their temporary and ultimate benefit. So, sorry, I misread the commentary Rinpoche says. In the present moment, there are Buddhas who ultimately Buddhas don't enter into parinirvana, but however, conventionally, in the view of beings in confusion, they will manifest their entry into parinirvana. This is not without reason. It has benefit. But the fact that the Buddhas continue to manifest themselves for beings, there are temporary and ultimate benefits. And so I address myself to the Buddhas who have the intention to enter into parinirvana, to reabsorb their manifestation. And so I address to them, I pray to them not to enter parinirvana by insisting on the fact that their presence will bring great good to sentient beings, relatively and ultimately. And for their temporary and ultimate good, and I ask them to stay and to continue to manifest themselves, not for a limited time, but for an unspeakable time, for as many kalpas as there are atoms in the universe. And how do I do this request? I do this request with my hands joined with great deference. And for this, and so that the Buddha can bring a temporary good, that is good conditions in the samsara, and then ultimate benefit through enlightenment. And then we get to the last of the seven branch prayer, which is the dedication of merit. Whatever small merit has been garnered here through prostrating, offering, and disclosing, rejoicing, entreating, and beseeching, I dedicate it all for the sake of enlightenment. So this is stanza number 12. Rinpoche is now reading the translation by Patrick Carré that we don't have in English. So the dedication of merit and which is also present further in the text. It's already present here to complete the seven branch prayer. This is the last of the practice. So it is dedicating the merit that we have accumulated through the homage to the Buddhas, the offerings, to the confession, through rejoicing in the virtues, and through the request to teach, our prayer to stay, for the Buddhas to stay, all these merits that might arise, that stem from this, I dedicate them entirely to the perfect enlightenment, to obtaining perfect enlightenment. So, to summarize, up till now, we have rendered homage to show our respect, our deference through the admiration that we have towards the Buddha, toward the enlightenment, through our body, speech, and mind. We have made offerings, ordinary and possible. And then through the 4 powers, we have revealed all our faults. We have purified all our faults. We have rejoiced in the virtues of ordinary beings, but also realized beings, Aryas, the Shravaka, the Pratyeka Buddha, the Bodhisattvas, and the Buddhas. We have also asked the Buddhas to turn the wheel of the teachings. We have asked them not to enter into parinirvana. So, whatever the merit that we have, that this has engendered, that these 6 practices have engendered, that I have done today, and any other merit that I have accumulated before that, we will think that of all the merits that we have accumulated in the past, that we are accumulating now in the present, and that we will accumulate in the future, we dedicate all this. The virtues that I have accomplished, but the virtues that I might have encouraged other people to accomplish, whether it is through rejoicing, by having praised, by having encouraged other beings to virtue. But I also take into account all the virtues of all sentient beings, and I gather them all into one, all the virtues of the past, present, and the future, mine, those of others, and I dedicate all this to full enlightenment, full and perfect enlightenment. So I try to render all these virtues equal to the absolute dimension, the ultimate dimension, the Dharma Dhatu. I equalize all merits in the Dharma Dhatu. This means that I wish that all these virtues dedicating them to enlightenment, I wish that all these virtues actualize enlightenment for myself and for all sentient beings. What would happen if I didn't dedicate merits? This merit would only bring a fruit for oneself, will only have very limited good for oneself, and will limit itself to a very sort of happiness, a goodness in conditioned existence, a benefit in conditioned existence. The merits of Shravaka will only go beyond suffering. And this is why it's important to dedicate it to the full and perfect enlightenment. As long as this full and perfect enlightenment is not realized, these merits will constantly become sources of well-being, felicity, happiness in the world, and increase the happiness of being of ourselves and of all beings. And once we have attained enlightenment, like perfect enlightenment, that is nirvana, that is not localized, that I've already explained, this merit will remain as long as space remains, and will accomplish the good of benefit of beings. And the fruits of this merit will be limitless. So the practice of the dedication was recommended and put forward by all the Tathagatas. In the teaching of the Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom, the dedication is also exalted, praise put forward. So even the merit of generosity and the idea of giving the merit that could come from generosity and making the merit the something that belongs to something to we give this merit, we make it a common good, we make it a good for all, a common good for all. The merit that was thus dedicated, the way that we have made it something common, and having dedicated to perfect enlightenment, this merit cannot be characterized, is without characteristic. Its ultimate reality is not observable. And understanding this, it's the dedication. What do we give? Who gives? To whom is it given? We see that the agent, object, and the act, once all this is dedicated, the very act, does not have subject, action, object that can be grasped. So we have to associate discernment to this act of giving. And the veritable dedication, that's what it is. It understands that it discerns emptiness from the agent, the act, and the object of the act. But nonetheless, there's no grasping of the dedication. This is true dedication. So, relatively speaking, at a relative level, the object of dedication is the unsurpassable enlightenment. The aim of the dedication is for the welfare, the good of the benefit of all beings. And the object that is dedicated is all the merit, the virtue that is unobservable, in the sense that observing that neither the merit itself nor the agent of the merit nor the object of the merit, the act of dedicating, the fact that these are not observable, it's like this that we make the true dedication. This is explained in the chapter on dedication of the adamantine banner, that part of the sutra. So this concludes the 7-branch prayer, the practice in 7 parts, 7 branches. Then we come to the main part that that consists in the various wishes that we formulate. Maybe we should give more time to questions and answers this afternoon and continue the main part tomorrow. I'm going to read this part of the text that's linked to the dedication. So, noble sons, there is what we call dedicate everything that precedes. This consists in dedicating to all beings until the confines of space and the absolute dimension, all the merits accumulated from the homage to the Buddhas to the fact of responding to the needs of beings, and for them to know peace and happiness and be free from illness and suffering so that they don't cause harm that they were going to do, and that the benefits come to fruition, to close the access to unhappy destinies and to show the right path and even to the nirvana. Take upon yourself the worst sufferings that beings could suffer because of negative karma, the negative deeds that they have committed, so that they access liberation. This dedication cultivated by the bodhisattva will have no end. Whatever the negative karma that has been accumulated, continue without your body, speech, and mind ever tiring. My question is about desire. So we see a lot of suffering in the world. We often say that we want to change the world. This can seem generous, but it's still based on desire of change, on the desire to create a better world, and this can create a lot of agitation and effort and tension towards an expectation of result. So my question is, how do we encourage people who are in this dynamic, but who are not in the Dharma? So if we look into Dharma, we can find answers. But if we're with, or if we're with people who are not in Dharma, who are kind of like activists, how do we appease them? How do we encourage them to do things a little differently? There's not really an answer that works universally. You have to see, depending on the circumstance, and above all, of the disposition of the person. When we talk about activism, it's interesting to ask the question on motivation. Sometimes we're driven by hatred, sometimes we're driven by desire, sometimes we're driven by jealousy. And so if you look throughout history, a lot of atrocities were caused in the name of happiness, of good, and people pursued these actions always driven by desire, aggression. But the truth is, all beings without exception have exactly the same motivation. Every being wants happiness, pleasure, well-being. Everyone wants to avoid suffering. Look at the tiniest insect. They're trying to flee suffering and find their good. Every sentient being is looking for the same thing. So think a little bit about motivation. And if people can be open to understanding problems with affliction, and if we undertake an action driven by afflictions, the fact that it can be harmful, and the importance, we should some be activists towards ourselves. Change things in ourselves in order to see something change outside in the world. There was another aspect to your question I can't quite recall. Because there can be a motivation of generosity. So that's important, if it's really generosity or not. If it's a generosity that's for some against others, is it really generosity? For example, if you can go a little deeper, the analysis on the four immeasurables, loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. If you can deepen your knowledge of these subjects, it can really help to understand the right attitude to adopt that will be beneficial for self and everyone else, that's not harmful. Loving kindness, compassion, the way it's taught in Buddhism, is not attached to an objective or a particular conditions. So for an activist, a militant, they can imagine that this situation is what's better for others, and so we're attached to a certain project that is just the reflection of one's fiction, of one's limited vision, that cannot see all the possibilities. So there can be an aspect of loving kindness and generosity, but it's limited by the fact that we're not freed from our fictions. We're attached to our preconceived ideas of what we think is good for others, without understanding causality between our actions and our becoming. So it's very important for compassion to be indissociated, inseparable from wisdom, from discernment. And in this way, compassion is just the fact of being profoundly sensitive to the suffering of beings, even more sensitive to one's own suffering, and to do what we can without associating it with a type of fiction of what happiness would be. So somehow we have to understand what is the ultimate and temporary well-being of beings. So we have to understand causality. It's about rejoicing of an act that we are witnessing, and the importance of expressing it to the person. Is it important to express to another person? Because there can be an element of adding pride. Is it important to express, to rejoice of the actions of others? We can accomplish rejoicing of others without necessarily implying the need to express it, to tell her to a person. It's not necessary to express it to another person. It doesn't mean to say that if we have the occasion to congratulate someone on their spiritual progress, that we can express it, or we can express our appreciation, but we should also see if it's beneficial, if it will create pride. It depends on the degree of progression. Buddhas obviously don't need it. Sometimes beginners need some encouragement. And so if we see that by encouraging them we can help them to progress more, then it's good to do it. But if we see that it's something that it's someone who has a tendency to pride, it's not necessarily a good thing. It's better not to do it, because you have to look at the circumstances. Sometimes it can encourage one not to say anything. First of all, Rinpoche, thank you for your sharing on the loving and respect that you infuse in us, and it elevates our practice. It touches me deeply. My question is, well, in all the teachings, I have felt the need to, and certainly the death of my son a few years ago, I feel a need to go a bit lighter and not do as much formal practice. Sorry, so my mantra is to do as best as I can. I just light a candle. The first part of the Prajnaparamita, emptiness is form, form is emptiness. Could you please not necessarily give me a response to, not necessarily give me not necessarily give me an answer to the fact that I've lightened up my practice, but whether it's satisfactory and dedication. I try to do it. I don't always think of it. I do it for all beings, for final enlightenment, because I think this enlightenment is what interests me most. Thank you. Well, I recommend that you cultivate bodhicitta on the basis of the four immeasurables: loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Try to integrate this in your life and constantly refine your motivation, and what we call bodhicitta. It's very important. There is it right when I see what is said, all the bodhisattvas do, it's unlimited, it's unending. If I listen to this with the samsara functioning, I say it's not possible, it's too hard. If I think of how the bodhisattva works, it's like I see their energy to help. They don't have this samsaric happiness. It's not by attachment. It's like through an energy to take us, to lead us. It's like a love that's not human, that's not driven by attachment. So I'm thinking of them operating this way, of leading everyone, taking everyone under their arm with their courage, but it's not like a human courage. I'm not sure if I've explained this right. So there's a difference between a human way of operating and a bodhisattva's way of operating. Yeah, I think you've caught a glimpse of the meaning. Just like take loving kindness, Maitri. If you see its benefit, it's not an obligation. There's no expectation of anything in return. The fact of having this attitude of mind is beneficial at the very moment it's present. And same for the bodhisattva. Having access to wisdom, inseparable from compassion, is his own good, and that through which he can accomplish the well-being of others in a tireless way. And so the activity of a Buddha is not an intentional activity like ours. Like we have a kind of volition that leans on ego. The Buddhas are free from this. It's not as if the Buddhas were someone and saying, oh, like, who can I help today? Who called me today? Who called on me today? Let me see, who will I help first? Two are praying at the same time. If I prefer one or the other will be jealous. And the best example that's given is the sun. When the sun shines in the sky, the sun doesn't have the intention of shining into light. It shines. It's its nature. It's its reality. And so the Buddha doesn't have to formulate an intention or the will to help. It's his reality. He only helps. So the image that's given when the sun shines in the sky, it has the nature. Its nature is to reflect in all water, all points of the water. And so when the Buddha is present, it reflects in all the minds, in all minds of sentient beings. And so different minds can perceive it more than others, just as certain parts of the water will reflect the sun in different ways. Some are troubled by wind, others are much clearer. So it doesn't reflect the sunlight in the same way. In some parts, for example, in the grotto in the Padirak, to speak of things closer to us, or at the bottom of a well, I mean, you might not see the sun shine. The sun may never shine there. So is that the fact? Is that the Buddha's fault? Is it the sun's fault? No. It depends on the circumstance in which the water finds itself, exposed or not. So the Buddha never stops to help beings, and and sometimes certain beings don't have the disposition, the possibilities to perceive or to be in relation to a teaching of the Buddha, just as the water can't always reflect the sun. We know that plants and trees communicate and protect themselves from aggressions. Can we consider them as sentient beings? Otherwise, what defines a sentient being? It's a very old debate, very ancient debate. In India, you have the Jains, who consider plants as sentient beings. They consider having only one sense faculty, just touch. So now today we say they communicate by pheromone or something. The Jains consider that they're sentient beings. So the Jains don't eat roots, for example. The Jains. They only eat the fruit that the tree yields. So maybe not potatoes. But the position of Buddhism on this debate is that plants are not sentient beings, as sentient beings as animals, insects, etc. Based on simple observation on the functioning of plants. You can cut a branch, and it depends, it becomes another tree with a root. So if you replant, is it the same being or is it two beings? So in terms, it's living in the biological sense, but it's not a sentient being. So in the West, as we have a reduced consciousness to a kind of epiphenomena, we tend to look at the biological constituents, and so plants have a similar functioning. So they're in the category of the living, but by sentient beings, we understand the consciousness. In philosophy, there's also the consciousness of the I, the self, etc. It's not in that sense. It's the fact that it's this. In this instant, I perceive. I have a capacity of perception, and the form of perception intransitive, the consciousness of the consciousness. This is a quality of consciousness that all sentient beings have, insects, humans. They might not necessarily recognize this reality, but the fact is that consciousness is conscious. And so all sentient beings have this. So certain sentient beings have a biological body, human beings, animal, so others can have maybe just a body of energy. In Buddhism, particularly in the Vajrayana Buddhism, we associate mind and body. Mind is the quality of consciousness, the capacity of perception, and the energy that supports it is the body at the subtle level that is inseparable from the mind, but that nonetheless can be distinguished. So there are Buddhist texts that speak about sentient beings that can identify with a tree, etc., that can live in plants, but plants in and of themselves don't guarantee the presence of a consciousness that make them a sentient being. Any other questions? I didn't understand what parinirvana. I didn't understand what you said about parinirvana. What is it? You said that ultimately it doesn't exist, so maybe it's a bit pedagogical. But a Buddha that goes into parinirvana, does he keep an individuality? Do we give, because characteristics are given to Buddhas. So parinirvana for us, it's a honorific way of speaking about the death of a Buddha. The historical Buddha, 2,500 years, Siddhartha Gautama, the prince, Nepali, studied practices, contemplative practices, and followed aesthetic doctrines for a period of 6 years, and then let go of those practices to discover through himself the path of enlightenment, reaches enlightenment, and then starts to teach and develops a very large, has many disciples who follow him through nearly 45 years of teachings, many followers in the north of India. And then he passes away in Kushinagar. And when he dies, it's called the parinirvana. The presence of the Buddha disappears from this world. You can't see him, you can't speak to him. From the Shravaka point of view, we consider that the Buddha was born as a human being like you and I. He reached enlightenment in his life, and from the moment he reached enlightenment, he put an end to the production of karma. And so there were karmic residues from past lives that conditioned this life, and this led to the extinguishing. And so now there's no more karmic residue. And at his death, he accomplishes or attains nirvana, beyond suffering. The position in the Great Vehicle is that he was a bodhisattva who was born as a prince, as Siddhartha Gautama. And for 3 kalpas, 3 kalpas before, he was already enlightened. He saw that the times and place was propitious for him to manifest where he manifested himself. And then he was born as Siddhartha Gautama, and it was appropriate for him to come to help beings and to reveal the truth to all beings, to beings, to turn the wheel of the teachings, the wheel of the Dharma. And so from beginning to end, he was always enlightened. And everything we perceived was like an emanation, an appearance. The Buddha could not be reduced to an appearance, but this appearance was manifest to us. He was, even if he was beyond it. And this is affirmed in other sutras. In one of these sutras, in the very instant that he was present in this world, he he was present in an infinity of other worlds, giving teachings of Dharma. So his activity as an enlightened being could not be limited just to a historical person in a given time in this world. And so, as he was just an emanation, the parinirvana for a Buddha, there was no birth, no death, no abandonment of beings. His instead of being a person, he is manifested through his teaching. It's the manifestation that changes through his teachings, through his relics. And he said he would have other manifestations that would continue to come and help beings according to need. So when we ask about, when we address ourselves to Buddhas about to enter parinirvana, it is simply to ask that their manifestation, because as a Buddha, through his enlightenment, is free from death. He can also stay as long as he wishes. We are conditioned by karma. So our past acts determine the length of our life to a large extent. So the dispositions in the stream of our being run out, even if we're in good health. There are other circumstances. We can't escape death. It doesn't mean to say, for example, you can have the possibility, for example, to live to 80 or 100 years, but if our behavior is bad, we can lessen this lifespan. We shouldn't see it as something deterministic. It is to speak about the conditions that we create. The Buddha is free from all these conditions, and because of this, if we ask him to prolong his life, and this is what happened with the historical Buddha. It's said that when he was in Vaishali, he would have said to Ananda on several occasions, as Buddha, I can stay as long as I wish, but Ananda didn't think of asking him to stay, and Mara appeared asking him to come into parinirvana rapidly. Then a lay person came and asked the Buddha to live longer for the benefit of beings, and so the Buddha prolonged his life for 3 months. And there's a stupa that commemorates this event. The stupa of the complete victory. There's a stupa behind in the Sukhavati garden. So in the practice, we're addressing these Buddhas by asking the Buddhas not to enter into parinirvana. We are like the spokesperson of sentient beings, so that the greatest number of beings may benefit from the presence of the Buddha, to perceive the Buddha, to receive his teachings, but also for ourselves. We create the disposition to one day find ourselves in the presence of a Buddha. And if we haven't found ourselves in the presence of the Buddha, it's because we haven't created these dispositions. If we have the sincere wish and constant wish to be in the presence of the Buddha, we will perceive his presence. So in the Mahayana, we speak of the Buddha as having 3 bodies: Dharmakaya, the body of reality. It's his realization of the ultimate dimension, because he's entered into the ultimate dimension. He's he's realized the Dharmakaya. That's what he has realized for himself. That includes omniscience. And for sentient beings, through their merit, he developed the body manifestation, the Nirmanakaya and the Sambhogakaya. Nirmanakaya is the body of temporary manifestation in time, in a given time, that can be perceived by all ordinary beings. That's for example, the historical Buddha. And the Mahayana also affirms that the Buddha has a Sambhogakaya, that is a body of perpetual manifestation that can be perceived by beings who have achieved ultimate reality. And who can receive his teaching. And so the grace of the Buddha is perpetual. The Nirmanakaya is not just limited to the historical Buddha. There can be an infinity of different manifestations to help sentient beings according to different circumstances. For example, there's the story of the player of the sitar. There was a king who was a great musician. He was extremely proud to be so talented with the stringed instrument, and so the Buddha saw he could help. He saw he could have the disposition to understand the teaching, but he had to kind of surmount his pride. So he appeared as another musician, as talented as him, and proposed a kind of competition. And so he had a lute with 100 strings, and every time he cut a chord, he managed to create as many sounds, and then he finally got to one chord, and they could play all imaginable sounds. So he thought he had found his equal. And so the manifestation of the Buddha proposed to cut the last string. And the king could no longer play anything. And the emanation of the Buddha, being the Buddha, was able to play all sounds without strings. So he found someone higher than himself. The king found someone higher than himself. And so in this way, the Buddha introduced him to the path of enlightenment. So thank you very much. There were a few people who wished to take refuge, I think. Are you here tomorrow? Do you mind if we do this tomorrow? Thank you very much. We'll do this tomorrow at the end of the teaching. Tamche Zibani Domye Nyepe Dranam Pache
Chega na che balaba truba ye sibe solen rowan rower show Changchu Semcho Rinpoche Mache Panam Chijuruchi Cheba Nyamba Meba Kone Kondo Power Show.